These days, we're used to hearing things like superlative chronometer, METAS, or various accuracy measurements for watches to ensure that they're within a few seconds of accuracy a day. Mechanical watches with this level of precision often cost way more than their quartz counterparts and is often tucked behind the highest tiers of their pricing. But it's a bit of a moot point in a world where everyone has a phone, and it makes mechanical precision now a subjective exercise. But it wasn't always like that. For almost 3 centuries, luxury mechanical watchmaking operated on a simple principle, and that was precision. If you paid more money for a watch from Switzerland, you weren't just paying for precious metals, you were buying better chronometric performance. A hand-adjusted, high-grade mechanical instrument that was supposed to be from the best in the world. But by the late 1950s, the watch industry was hitting a wall of diminishing returns. You could adjust the balance wheel within a few seconds a day, but mechanical friction, temperature fluctuations, and gravity would always impose a hard limit. These days, you see the use of novel materials like silicon to try to overcome some of those limitations. But they didn't have that back then, so they turned to electricity instead. First with battery-powered balance wheel, and then with Bulova's revolutionary tuning fork through their Acrotron in the 1960s. The Swiss watch industry wasn't blind to this, they were aware of it even before Seiko brought about the quartz revolution. They understood that the technology of timekeeping was shifting. So in 1962, nearly 24 major Swiss manufacturers from the likes of Patek Philippe, Rolex, Omega, Piaget, and IWC did something unexpected. They put aside their rivalries and pooled their resources to form the CEH and Neuchâtel. Their goal was to bring quartz technology from the size of a cabinet down to something that would fit on the wrist. At the time, they didn't think that they were going to refine watch design. They thought that they were just developing a hyper-accurate quartz movement that they would later go on and put in their existing elegant Swiss watch cases. It was an endeavor to build a next generation of Swiss movements, but it would cause them each to rethink their own design language and identities going forward. To get to that point, first, they needed to lose a race, specifically one against Japan. By the late 1960s, there were 2 different approaches to electric timekeeping that were competing for the future. The first approach was Seiko, who launched the Astron in late 1969. Seiko's quartz architecture used what we know today as a stepper motor, the dominant technology in pretty much every quartz watch you have seen since. If you've ever seen a second-hand tick, more likely than not, it's a stepper motor. You're watching the process of electrical pulse being sent to the hands every second. It's clean, efficient, and means that the battery only has to do work for a fraction of a second. The Swiss, however, developed a different electronic architecture, and that was the Beta 21. Instead of a stepping motor that ticked once every second, it had an electromagnetic vibrating drive system, one that was heavily inspired by its tuning fork predecessors. Instead of ticking, an electronic circuit would cause a tiny motor inside the Beta 21 to vibrate continuously, physically driving the gear train forward. Aesthetically, it was stunning and captured the refinement of the Swiss industry. The Beta 21 hums, and its second hand glides across the watch dial in a smooth, continuous sweep, just like its tuning fork counterpart, much like the visual effect too of a modern-day spring drive movement from Seiko. But the practicality of it was problematic. Because the internal motor had to continuously vibrate without stopping, it consumed power at an extreme rate, often requiring battery changes within months instead of years. In addition to that, the constant friction of the vibrating parts meant that the movement wore out faster over time. Then there was the size, something that brands wouldn't have anticipated when they were just looking to retrofit or build upon their designs. From the bulky battery to the vibrating coils to early circuit boards, the Beta 21 was an awkward rectangular brick. It was over 6 millimeters thick and nearly 30 millimeters long. So while Japan was mass-producing slim, ticking quartz watches for the world, the Swiss consortium had only produced 6,000 units of a thick, battery-hungry movement that didn't fit any traditional watch case that they had. Nearly every major Swiss luxury manufacturer had at least one Beta 21 watch. It became less of a commercial product and more of a shared design experiment. Now, that left the design departments at places like Patek Philippe, Rolex, Omega, or Piaget a bit stuck. In the 1960s, dress watches were defined by ultra-slim profiles. Think of Piaget's 9P movement, which was 2 millimeters thick. You couldn't just drop the Beta 21 to a standard gold case and cover it without it looking like a massive hockey puck. That might sound strange today, where anything under 10 millimeters is considered slim. But in the 1960s, 5 to 6 millimeters was standard for a luxury dress watch. A Beta 21 case that was over 8mm felt genuinely thick for the standards of the time. Since watchmakers couldn't shrink the movement, the designers had to take over to manipulate the human perception of it. The watch cases started transitioning from just being containers for movements into being architectural sculptures. Piaget's approach was to reference 15101, also dubbed the Andy Warhol, and operate on an optical illusion. Instead of a flat vertical case side, Piaget built a series of stepped concentric gold rings that cascaded outwards from the crystal. Each step catches light from a different angle, creating alternate steps of highlight and shadow. Rather than reading one tall vertical wall, the eye perceives a series of smaller architectural layers. Your brain interprets the depth as a stylistic choice rather than physical bulk. The dynamic nature of the steps means that your eye is constantly led away from the center where that 8+ mm of thickness is. Rolex, though, tried to highlight that bulk with their reference 5100, the Texano. It was a departure from anything that had made before, specifically a leap from the oyster case. This was a geometric case design that featured sharp beveled edges and integrated angular lugs that flowed directly into a massive heavy gold bracelet, along with being the first to have a quick set date. Each of these novel advances, including the Beta 21 movement, was highlighted in a geometrical case that looked more like modern art. The thickness was leveraged intentionally in the design. It gave the watch presence matching its significance for Rolex at the time. Then there was Patek Philippe, one of the pinnacles of classical watchmaking, and they went full avant-garde with a reference 3587. They designed a massive 43mm circular cushion case that looked like it took its inspiration from 1970s television sets. The sheer width of the case overtook the perception of its vertical height and made it a bold space-age statement piece. By 1972, the CH quietly abandoned the Beta 21 line. The Swiss adopted stepper motors and the consortium would fall apart, with brands branching off to independently develop slimmer quartz movements of their own, such as the Rolex Oyster Quartz or the Omega Mega Quartz of the time. The Beta 21 movement was definitely a commercial failure, but culturally and aesthetically, it was one of the single most important catalysts in modern Swiss watch design. It forced the industry to confront the fact that accuracy was no longer a luxury. If a cheap quartz watch could keep better time than a hand-finished tourbillon, then the traditional definition of watchmaking was dead. That lost their monopoly on accuracy. But the Beta 21 movement and the quartz revolution overall helped to force the Swiss to evolve. Watchmaking was no longer about competitive chronometry. It was about aesthetic distinction, emotional resonance, and subjective value. Even these days, where you see a tit for tat about mechanical movements that have gone through rigorous accuracy testing, it's all just subjective value, because your phone or a $10 quartz watch beats it by far. But the value of the Beta 21 is that it became one of the major catalysts of 1970s watch design. It showed that when the movement inside the watch becomes secondary, ubiquitous, the case and dial can then stop being relegated to being mere containers and become the primary art form, the primary focus. This period would influence and open the door for modern luxury watch design. The Swiss might have lost the accuracy race to the Japanese, but in doing so, they had to pivot and come to realize that the watches that are the most important to people aren't always the ones that keep the best time.